Welcome to the 6.1 Notes, Graphing Exponential Functions. Those of you who are working from home, I have put copies of this entire unit's assignments and notes in the front office for you. Please come grab one. If you are working from home, this is one section because we are graphing that you may want to print the notes for. It's just one page for the notes. On mine, because I can print double-sided, the assignments on the back side here. But if you can't print double-sided, I know that'll just be 2 pages instead of more. Then the next section will be something called exponential growth and decay. Those are equations, so you won't necessarily need a printed copy. But I would highly recommend having a printed copy for this. If you don't, you can obviously make notebook paperwork too. Some of the numbers just get a little bit higher and or are decimals, so it might be a little more difficult, which is why I'm suggesting that. So this entire unit is over something called exponentials and the inverse or the opposite of them, which is called a logarithm. The general form of an exponential function looks like this. And I'm going to come back to this all unit. Basically, what I need you to know is that this number in front right here, a, that is the initial value. Okay, so it is also known as the y-intercept because that's where we usually start a graph when we're graphing it. Okay? And then this number right here is called the multiplier. What that means is we're going to take this number and multiply it by this number. How many times, you ask? Good question. This many times. So this exponent is a power, and that means that is the number of times you multiply by b. Okay? And I'm going to give you an example over here on the right because I usually find that this helps a little bit. And that is if you have a times b squared. That means the same thing as a times b times b. Whereas if you have a times b to the third, that's a times b times b times b. Okay, so all that exponent is doing is saying how many times you're multiplying by b. But this is way easier to write than this, especially as that becomes a bigger number. And one last thing is that multiplier, the thing you're multiplying by, will never be a negative, 0, or 1. Because when you multiply by 0 and 1, either nothing changes if you multiply by 1, or if you multiply by 0, everything becomes 0. And then we don't use a negative number because then if you multiply by a negative, like let's say you take 3 times negative 2, that makes negative 6. Then if you multiply by negative 2 again, it makes it back to positive 12. So the sign flips every time and things just get really confusing. So it's only going to be positive and it's not going to be 0 or 1 exactly. If that multiplier inside of the parentheses is greater than 1, then that means it's going to be exponential growth. Because if you multiply something by a number bigger than 1, like say 2, it's going to be going up or growing. And when you graph exponential growth, it's going to look something like this. I'm just going to draw my my y-axis, my x-axis, and then it looks something like this. It starts really flat down here at the bottom. It's almost like it's parallel to the x-axis, and then it goes up really fast. That's called growing exponentially when it starts going up really fast. Notice how that is not a straight line. And then over here, if b is less than 1. So if you multiply by something less than 1, like say a half, that's going to make your number go down. And instead of going up like this, it's going to come down like this. So instead of being kind of like flat on the left, it's going to be kind of like flat on the right. And those are your 2 general shapes. Okay, and then I'm going to write the 3 main points for you eventually. I promise I will. But I'm going to skip this part for right now. And I'm going to go ahead and put the top part up here. If you're writing these notes on your own, go ahead and make sure you have all this written down. You don't have to write this part right here because you wrote it over here. Okay, so I'm going to skip the points for one main reason. And that main reason is because there's actually an easier way of graphing these. So this is your initial value, this is your multiplier. Sorry about that. And this is your multiplier. What that means is that you're going to start at 5. And then you're going to take that 5 times 1/2. And then you're going to take that answer times 1/2 again. Okay? And this is going to be over 1. This is going to be over 2 because we multiplied by it twice. So 5 times 1/2 is 2.5. So here's the part where it gets a little tricky. You're going to go to the value of 2.5 on the y-axis. And then you're going to go over 1. You're not counting from this point like we did last unit. You're counting on the y-axis, go to 2.5 over 1. And then 2.5 times another 1/2, or half of 2.5, is 1.25. And then I'm going to go over 1 more and up to 1.25, which is like right here. And I can keep multiplying by 1/2 if I want, but I'm starting to get into some weird decimals, so I'm going to go ahead and stop and say this. You've got 2 points over here on the right side. We need one on the left side. So in order to go backwards, instead of multiplying by 1/2, we need to divide by 1/2. But it's really tricky to multiply by a fraction. So what I'm going to do instead is multiply by 2 over 1, the reciprocal. So if I want to go backwards, 1.25 times 2 is 2.5. 2.5 times 2 is 5. 5 times 2 is 10. And that's how I get the next point to the left. So as you go to the right, multiply your y value by whatever the multiplier is. And as you go to the left, divide by it. And then I'm going to draw my curve through here. Now this is a number less than 1 is my multiplier. So it's going to look like this. And there you go. And then over here on the right side, we're going to do the same idea, except for I'm going to go a little bit quicker through this one, okay? This is going to be your initial. I know that's a little strange. This is going to be your multiplier. And I tried to put some decimals on the notes so that you can get used to them. Not all of the problems are going to have these weird decimals. So I need to start at 1.5. Boom. And then to go over 1 to the right, I need to multiply by 3. 1.5 times 3 is 4.5. Yes. So I'm going to go to 4.5 and over 1. And then I'm going to multiply by 3 again. And 4.5 times 3 is 13.5. So I'm going to go up to 13.5, but I have to go over 2 this time because I multiplied by 3 twice. So these x values down here just tell you, again, how many times you multiplied by b. And if you multiply by b -1 times, it's like dividing. So going backwards would be 1.5 divided by 3. And if you don't know what that is, use a calculator. 1.5 divided by 3 is 0.5. So I'm going to go up to 1/2 and left 1 because I divided instead of multiplying. Always do that at least once. You need to have points on both sides. And then we're going to go like this. That's it. Okay, the only other thing that's going to show up on the homework is something like example 3, where you have the graph and you want to write the equation. And I'll go ahead and move down. Go ahead and pause it if you need to write anything down from these two. Because I need to get kind of close to this graph so that you can see it with me. You have one on your paper too, so you may have to use that. All right, so it looks like my y-intercept is right here at 2. And then I have to look for the next point over, which looks like it's right here at 5. 1, 5. So what that point would be. So we already know that the 2 is supposed to be the number in front of the parentheses. So we already know we get to start like this. That's your setup. That's the part that you don't really have to do any thinking about. The y-intercept is the number in front. What we have to figure out is what our multiplier is. So basically, 2 times what will get me to 5, because that's where my next y value is. And that's not going to be a whole number. 2 doesn't go into 5 nicely. So if you set it up like this, you can always just divide by the 2 on both sides to get that your blank that you're missing is 5/2. Or you can always just put a b in there, because b is the letter we use for the multiplier. So then b equals 5/2. I just know that some people have an easier time if we don't throw extra letters in there. And that's your equation. The ones on the assignment will be a little bit easier than that.